It being 6:01, I'm going to go ahead and call this April 10th, 2023 Somerville School Committee meeting as a Special Personnel Committee of the Whole to order. Superintendent Curley, will you call the roll?
Happily. Dr. Ackman. Mayor Ballantyne.
Present.
Ms. Petone. Dr. Phillips.
Present.
Ms. Dion.
Present.
Ms. Barish.
Present.
President Ewenkampen.
Here.
Ms. Krupchen.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Fantastic. I'm going to go, unless someone has something really pressing to share from the report out, I assume it'll come out in the middle of our normal conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and table that. I actually realized I was on the agenda. So that brings us to the heart of our matter, which is the superintendent search candidate discussion and vote. So before we get started on that, I just want to set some context for both members and the public, as this is an important night. The first thing I want to be clear on to everyone is that we have 4 strong candidates before us this evening. We will obviously only be hiring one of them, but it is my personal belief that all 4 of these candidates will be good to great superintendents in some district in the next couple of years, and certainly will be interviewing positions in the future. As this deliberation is going to be recorded, it's going to be part of the public record. I want to remind people that these are people's careers we're talking about, and I'm going to encourage people to, while certainly some level of comparison and analysis is inevitable in a decision like this, that we do so in a way that respects the hard work of the people who came before us and that does not trail them in negative ways in the years to come. In short, if your career was being analyzed by a public body on record, how would you want to be discussed? I urge members to act accordingly. Also, we have, over the last weeks and months, accumulated a great deal of information, quantitative and qualitative, public and private, individual and system on these candidates and ourselves as a district. And that's all information you should take into consideration, input from stakeholders, community input, references, all things that you've done, information you should take into consideration. But at the end of the day, this is probably going to be the most important decision any of us make on school committee. And all of us have taken an oath to do what we think right by the students, the staff, and the community of Somerville. Whatever happens tonight, I hope that all of us can go home tonight and feel we've upheld that oath and use our judgment to the best of our ability. And all of that said, it's also important to recognize that many of us have come here with opinions. We've been given this issue thought for days, weeks, perhaps even months, and may have come here tonight with an opinion as to who they plan to vote for. Even though you may have come to here with an opinion of who you may vote for, I urge all of us to keep an open mind, to actually listen to our colleagues, to respect the conversation, and to be open to change our minds if need be. And finally, at the end of the night, God willing, we will have appointed a superintendent. That initial vote will probably not be unanimous. However, we owe it to whoever we do appoint tonight to position them the best opportunities to be successful. In keeping with tradition for many organizations and many elections, after a majority of the body has voted for a candidate, I will call for a second vote to make that appointment unanimous. And while I cannot make you vote yes on that second vote, again, I remind you all that we owe it to the students, staff, and community of Somerville to do everything we can to make whoever this next superintendent of Somerville's start off in the best position to succeed. And that is incumbent upon us as a school committee to lead not only with good policies, but also with a good example. And so, with all of that said and all that context made, here's how we're going to do this procedurally. We're going to start with a straw poll, and I'm going to go around and go around the horseshoe from Dr. Ackman around and ask each member to give their top 2 preferences for candidates. And I want you to give them to me in alphabetical order so that there's no conversation about who's first choice, who's second choice. And we'll use that straw poll result to guide how we go about deliberating this evening. So, Dr. Ackman.
Carmona, Mendonsa.
Mayor Valentine, sorry.
You want us to give our first?
No, I want you to give both in alphabetical order. No order. No, she gave 2.
My apologies, I
Nope, no
didn't
problem.
hear that. Carmona and Romer.
Dr. Phillips.
Carmona and Romer.
Ms. Dion.
Carmona and Mendonsa.
Ms. Barish.
Carmona and Romer.
President Euenkampen.
Carmona, Romer.
Ms. Krepshin.
Carmona and Romer.
I vote for Carmona Romer. All right, so that has 8 for Carmona, 5 for Romer, and 2 for Mendonsa. So we will go ahead and start with Ms. Mendonsa, and then we'll go again after the quarter. So we'll do Mendonsa, Carmona, Romer, and we will start with those who wish, and if you don't, you can just pass, to speak to the positives they see in that candidacy, starting with Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. So I think, as we know, we're in the process of many other hires due to a mid-year departure of hiring a special education director, and I think Dr. Mendonsa's credentials, she certainly has an incredibly strong background in special education in a way that I think would benefit the community. Am I saying multiple things or just one?
You can say all of your positives, yes.
Okay. I think she was very passionate about this district and coming here, and I think she spoke to a vision for the future of the district in a very clear-eyed but open-minded way.
Thank you. And I'm just going to go around and call, and if you don't want to speak to the strengths of this candidate, you don't have to. Just say pass. Mayor Ballantyne.
So for candidate Dr. Carmona, I would say he
No,
brings...
sorry, we're doing Ms. Mendonsa. Dr. Mendonsa right now.
Oh, Pat.
Okay. No problem. Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Mendonsa is someone I can see myself working with and enjoying working with her. I think her references really spoke to her ability to develop principles in a way that was very strong. And I think her creativity and approach to solving very hard problems in education would be a benefit to the district.
Thank you. Ms. Dion?
I want to echo what Dr. Ackman said about...
Thank you for that. Just echo.
about Dr. Mendonsa being very passionate about being in this district, so much so that she's, she came up with the idea of the hybrid start to balance her desire to be here with her family medical needs. And I think that, while it would be, an interesting start to have her being hybrid 6 months, I can respect...
Remember, just say with the positives for now.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah. I can respect the need and the want to balance family obligations and career, and I think that's something we can all relate to. I also felt like both times her answers to interview questions just really inspired me. And I feel like she was able to take accountability of her own like leadership mistakes in the past. Like she was able to own the fact that in the past she has learned a lot from mistakes that she made early on as a leader, and she was able to be accountable for that and own up to that. And I really admire that. Thank you.
Ms. Barish?
Thank you. I thought that Dr. Mendonsa had a lot of really inspiring ideas. I know that families in the district felt a connection to her, some families, and that she, just, I don't know how we say this. Yeah, just a lot of inspiring ideas that she could bring to the district and help us move in the direction that we are already headed. Thank you.
Discussion?
I'll pass.
Okay. I'll echo some of Dr. Eckman's thoughts and just add that I thought that she brought probably the most systemic thinking and mental framework to the equity work of any of the candidates, which I think matters a lot. All right. Now we'll do the same thing with any concerns, and I want to be clear that this is not an opportunity to nitpick every negative. I want to focus this conversation as much as possible on the positives of candidates, but if there are concerns that a Mendonsa superintendency brings for you, this is the opportunity to share them. Again, we'll start with Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. What am I supposed to say through the chair? I realize I haven't done that.
No, we'll consider that rule suspended.
Okay, thank you. I understand the proposed hybrid start is concerning. Something I forgot to say initially is, should that happen, she would be the only one who would live in the city, as opposed to, it seems like no one else has proposed to move here. But I do know that the phased-in start is deeply concerning to a lot of people.
And as before, feel free to just echo things rather than having to say them again for consistency's sake. Mayor Ballantyne?
Pass.
Dr. Phillips?
Pass.
Ms. Dion? Pass. Ms. Barish?
I'd just like to expand upon the concerns of a phased-in start. I think that beginning as a superintendent in any new district is going to be challenging, and there's a lot of getting to know the community, getting to know the staff and the residents, the parents, the students, everyone, all the stakeholders. And I think that to do that in a 3-day per week physically in the district way just adds to that challenge. And while I know that we've all gotten very used to having Zoom meetings and Zoom conversations, the way we interact over Zoom is not the same as the way we do in person. So I just think that a remote 2-day-a-week start will just make it that much harder to begin this role in a new city so far from home.
Description?
I just wanted to add that while being bilingual is not a requirement of the job, we do have other candidates who are bilingual, and Dr. Mendonsa is not, so I just wanted to add that.
And I just want to expand upon both Ms. Barish and Dr. Ackman by also pointing out that a district that doesn't have a hybrid policy for its staff, it feels to me really challenging to start that at the top when everything that I feel and believe about leadership says it be the other way around. Yeah. All right, so that's Dr. Mendonsa. I'm just going in reverse order of the number of votes, so we'll do Dr. Romer next. First one every time. For the first time in 7 years, that one seat really matters.
Neat. Mr. Romer also spoke passionately about this district and his desire to be in this district. I heard from multiple people, I saw myself, how he had, for lack of a better way of putting it, done his homework. He had looked into our programs, our policies, showed a passion for Somerville and for wanting to be here specifically. I'm going to let others speak.
Thank you. Mayor Ballantyne.
Thank you. I would like to echo what my colleague just said and add also is I appreciated his honesty in saying that he needed support to build a budget, that was an area that he would need some help in. I appreciate that he's bilingual, that relationships are so important for him, understanding where people are coming from, making sure that there are stakeholders at the table. Appreciate also, his experience both in a urban district and a more suburban district, because I think that gives you multiple lenses to potentially add value to our community.
Dr. Phillips.
I think Mr. Romer has a very strong commitment to and track record of making schools and districts more inclusive and equitable for diverse students. He has extensive principal coaching experience. By my math, that's about 13 years as the Director of Data and Accountability and Supervising Principals in Newton. I think what comes across in his references is that the way that he excels at facilitating adult learning and development and building collaborative and reflective instructional communities, which I think is really huge. He has 8 years of district level experience, which I think positions him very well to lead Somerville on day one and continue the momentum that Mary started. And my understanding is that he is the preferred candidate of our principals and our cabinet, and I take that preference very seriously as I consider which way to vote.
Ms. Dion.
Pass.
Ms. Parrish.
I don't want to repeat everything. In addition to what's been said, references said that he really supports staff as a partner, that he's a great thought partner, and that he is able to maintain a sense of calm in a crisis, which is, I was told, is very helpful in getting through that moment. And additionally, I guess his commitment to equity and to sort of continuous learning in that area.
President Cameron?
I was blown away by Mr. Romer, by the totality of the application, the interview, the feedback, the parent, the educator feedback. The overall picture that I got was that Mr. Romer is a person who has incredibly deep and on-point experience, has the most kind of direct experience at this level. Someone who has earned trust and respect from people in all levels of the districts that he's worked, people, educators, colleagues, parents, families, and someone who very clearly shares our district's values. something that was very important to me. As you all know, I'm the person here tonight with the least kind of on-point experience in education in the district. I've been on the school committee since January 1st. I thought the answers that Mr. Romer gave in the interview were incredibly clear and concise and compelling. I think he showed a really, really strong talent for communicating with people who are not experts in education, people like me, and I assume lots of people, families in the district. I was also, as someone who's new to this process, I was really influenced by the overall feedback we got. I'll echo, he was the clear leader in the principals and aspects of the staff. That was also true of the families who took our survey. Which, granted, is a small sliver of all the families in Somerville, and we all know how important it is to think about what voices are not in the room, but that impacts me a lot. I think that this is a candidate who was clearly and strongly preferred by staff in the district, multiple different groups of staff, as well as people who responded to our survey. So I thought that overall he was an incredibly strong candidate.
Description?
I think everyone covered most of my points, but as I was the only one here who spoke to the students who had lunch with all of the candidates, I just wanted to share some of their feedback, which was that they really liked Toby. They felt he had some experience in Somerville and knew Somerville well. He felt like a coach to them, and they really appreciated how he talked about a time when he shadowed a student in high school on their day, following them around through their schedule to really get a feel for what they experience, and they appreciated that. So I just want to share that feedback from our students.
I can echo many of the things that were said. I do want to add that there was definitely a sense, putting in context that with the exception of Dr. Mendonsa, all of our candidates were first-time interviewees as superintendents. There was definitely a sense for me from Mr. Romer that he had already done the deep thinking as to like what he would do as a first-time superintendent from the beginning. Clearly, probably as a result of his having more district level experience than other candidates and having just been part of a superintendent search, definitely had the most polished perspective, and left no doubt that if selected July 1st, they'd be a competent and functional district administrator running a district. Concerns? Dr. Ackman.
So my concerns stem from, the presence that Mr. Romer brought that was charming to many. It wasn't as many, but there were plenty of people, especially constituents of mine, who were very clear that as parents, despite him being bilingual, that they would not feel comfortable going to him, reaching out to the superintendent's office with him in charge. This was sort of reinforced by the answer to his question on what you would do with how would you support the immigrant families. There were other responses that spoke about going out into the community, finding where those families are, trying to go be in community with them. Everything that he spoke to talked about they need to come to us. We need to make it a welcoming environment. Very clear that he wanted to make schools a welcoming environment to immigrant families. But what I heard was not a desire to go find the families and be with them. It was to bring them in and put the onus on them to come to us. To me, that is concerning. Again, there were many people who I spoke to who were fans, but I wanted to note that concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to echo my colleagues' comments about the concerns and reaching out to Mr. Romer. I heard the same thing. And I think the other thing, I just want to note is we received survey, but that wasn't like the way the information was collected and the little bar charts that we got, was not necessarily, consistent. So if, I don't know, for example, if all students showed up at every single lunch. I managed to go to 3 out of the 4 lunches, and in one, only 1 showed up. So I just want to be clear that this is not, the survey is not, by the practices of how one would collect data. I just wanted to mention that was with the process all around. Although that said, I totally appreciate the effort that everyone went through to try to make sure that people's voices were heard. So I don't necessarily agree that maybe parents felt the same way because the numbers were too close and it just wasn't even collected the same way. And I've gotten feedback that was outside of the survey too. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Tone, we are currently doing concerns with Dr. Romer. After we're done with that, I will let you come back and share your, I'm sorry, not Doctor, Mr. Romer. I'll let you, after we've done that horseshoe, I will let you come back and share your positives for Mr. Romer, as well as your concerns and positives for Ms. Mendonsa, Dr. Mendonsa. For the record, because I'm going to keep messing up tonight, I just want to say that all of our candidates, except for Mr. Romer, are doctors, and I will try my best to keep that title straight. But I want to state that's record. Ms. Patone.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize to my colleagues. I absolutely missed, even though it was posted and very clear that it was at 6 o'clock today, somehow I was a couple weeks ahead. So my sincere and disappointed in myself apologies. So, you know what? I do have concerns, but I just need a moment. So if we could kind of go around and come back, I apologize. It's all my responsibility, and I appreciate that.
Not a problem. Dr. Phillips.
Pass.
Ms. Dion.
I want to echo what Dr. Ackman said, and I want to build on that he, out of the 4 candidates, he's the one who had the least experience actually teaching in a classroom before moving into an administrative position, and that, that was something I kind of noticed during the first read through of resumes. Also, I feel like the skills needed to, have a successful interview and go throughout a school and win friends and influence people aren't necessarily the skills needed to actually do the job well. Obviously different stakeholders have a variety of different opinions, but I spoke with a few Newton educators who had a lot of concerns about the way he had run things. They told me that, which I referenced a little bit in his interview, that they felt that kind of a lack of trust there with the way that he just was rolling out a lot of new initiatives and not providing them with any professional development or anything. When we try to change something, we do it with a lot of thought. And what I gathered from them was that he mandated a lot of new initiatives all at the same time without any professional development, and so that was a bit of a concern for me.
Thank you. Ms. Barish?
I'll just reiterate the approachability for families factor, and also just, I guess, adjacent to what Ms. Dion said, I wonder if the distance from the classroom experience, just how in touch he is with the student experience, although I appreciate what Ms. Krupchen said about shadowing a high school student.
Ms. Krupchen?
I think everyone's covered mine for now.
Okay. I guess my concern is always the flip side of my positive, which is that I think of all the candidates, he comes to us most fully formed, which feels really good as far as him starting on July 1st, 2023. I guess my question is this what we see what we get? So like, is the guy we get on July 1st, 2023, the same guy we get on July 1st, 2025? And potential for growth is something I'm looking for in a candidate. So I think that's the one concern I have that hasn't been stated. And finally, sorry, Ms. Patana, are you prepared? And you can go through your positives and your concerns for both Dr. Mendonsa and Mr. Romer, just so we can get you caught up.
Thank you. Dr. Mendonsa and Mr. Romer.
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I had the right names. Both candidates had really positive references, particularly for.
Ms. Patone, just for the state of your colleagues, can you do them separately, not as like?
Oh, sure. Sorry, all mine. All right, so doesn't matter, Dr. Yep.
Be clear. So.
Okay, Dr. Mendonsa, highly collaborative. She was incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, creative. She had a lot of really interesting and innovative ideas for trying different things. Excited about her experiential learning experience, excited about talking about co-teaching. So I think she's a real creative mind, and her references, like I said, were really, in some ways, even more positive than she presented in her interviews. The people I spoke with had just glowing things to say about her collaboration and how she really set up leaders to try new things and let them know what the goals are, coach them, and let them run with new ideas, including changing staffing, changing ways that they do things, and they really appreciated her as a leader. Areas of concern with Dr. Mendonsa, not a huge track record in central office, and also the phase-in transition was a great concern. I'm sure everyone spoke about it already, so I don't need to add that in terms of both the ability to create relationships and build trust, as well as the burden that it would place on our staff. With Mr. Romer, he's an educator and administrator that has spanned from K all the way to 12, has spent time as a teacher, although not as long as some other candidates, but also time as a building leader, I think an assistant principal, both not only a building leader, but also coaching both educators and principals. As well as, his current role for the last 8 years in Newton Public Schools in the central office. He's considered, from what I heard from references, he's considered a really strong ally to leaders of color, and within SPS, some of the feedback was around, that was really compelling to me, was around someone I can learn from. He's a collaborative. The references were very positive, in particular feedback around systems and structures. So, even from earlier parts of his career when I talked to really respected educators, that he was establishing in his earlier roles system and structures so that when someone actually walked into his job after he left and said, wow, everything was really set up in a really nice way, that I could come in and do my work, as opposed to doing practices are just about the individual. So like sometimes a leader comes in and it's who they are, other times they set up in system and structures that are sustainable, and having that evidence was really compelling to me. I don't think I can add. I think my colleagues have done a great job talking about some of the areas of concern for Mr. Romer, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Carmona, Dr. Ackman.
As the chair had mentioned, something that I too look for is sort of the opportunity for growth within the role. I think Dr. Carmona comes with a very strong and extensive skill set. He mentioned in his interview, and he holds an MBA, to the point of training principals. His dissertation was on a principal induction program. He has, strong experience and seems just passionate and thoughtful and engaged on equity, on equity questions. When I saw him speaking with staff and principals, the questions he asked, showed a deep knowledge of the subject area. The leadership strategy he espouses, servant leadership, is something that I've studied and is just incredibly hard to do well, and he has it. I'll stop there.
Mayor Ballantyne.
So I will echo what my colleague said. Thank you 3 times in a row. And I'd also like to say that I've been a parent of a child in the Somerville Public Schools for 21 years. This is my 3rd superintendent search for superintendents, including Dr. Curley being the 4th. And I'm reminded of similar questions and thoughts that came up in Superintendent Parentazzi's, or while we were interviewing for him. So I think Dr. Carmona brings an open, thoughtful approach. I think that being bilingual and having the immigrant perspective with a strong equity lens is something that our student body, which is nearly 50% immigrant, he can connect to them. I'm also mindful that in my conversations with them during lunch is this idea of really sort of sitting and talking with parents. I was very mindful of the need and the want and desire of immigrant families to have someone they can really have a conversation with, and I believe he has this. I think he's curious. He embraces our values. I appreciate his thinking around consistency and fidelity when it comes to the use of qualitative and quantitative data. I think he has an inclusive approach. And I, appreciate his comment on politics, on when the 30-parent example, I think that my colleague, Dr. Phillips, posed to him about 30 parents who are coming and wanting to express their opinion, and he said, we need to listen, we need to create space and a mechanism to surface the concerns, and that customer service he saw as a part of his role, and honestly, I'd not heard of that that, identified that way before, and I really appreciated it. So, and I'm heard a lot from parents how impressed they were with his credentials and having a doctorate and an MBA. Thank you.
Ms. Patel.
Thank you, through you, Chair Green. Dr. Carmona's collaborative and customer service approach and broad application of an equity lens to all facets of the district work in his current role was really compelling to me. He was touching on HR, they're touching on instruction. It's really broad and very impressive. His experience as a dual language teacher, as well as an elementary school principal, and his current role focused on family, community, and employee engagement are all really compelling and impressive. In his interview, his focus on collective expectations and accountability, creating work as a collective and focused on what is best for kids was really clear to me. As an immigrant, he brings a worldview he shares with many of our students and clearly informs his work. I appreciate that he has additional education, including the MBA, that would give him, a strong business lens to the work. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Phillips?
I want to echo a lot of what everybody has said without duplicating your efforts. I want to highlight what for me was most profound about Dr. Carmona, which was his educational philosophy. In his letter to us, he wrote, "We have learned that we cannot create thriving student learning environments without setting the conditions for thriving and engaged adult communities of practice." I think that's really critical. That really speaks to me and resonates with who I would like to work with. I think one of the things that our administrators said in our focus group when we were asking them what they were looking for in a leader, they spoke about wanting someone who can focus on Tier 1 instruction, someone who can create a vision for instruction, create a plan for improving instruction, and motivate everyone to get behind that vision. And what the references that I had the privilege of speaking to told me about Dr. Carmona is that he excels at exactly that. They talked about his strength in instructional coherence, how they could see that when they walked into his school, how he was able to leverage all resources in support of that vision, how he was unwavering in his commitment to that vision, so much so that he didn't let ineffective educators stick around. They talked about his strong sense of urgency around instruction and his real strength as an instructional leader. I found that really compelling.
Ms. Dion.
Yeah, I think when I spoke with some Salem educators who had worked under him, they said that he was kind and very able to relate to students, and I definitely heard that in his interview questions as well, how he always brought it back to talking about our shared core values and how ultimately what all of us want is what's best for the kids. And I think that we have a unique opportunity here to appoint as superintendent, someone who looks like many of our most vulnerable populations of students and speaks the same language. And I think that this is a moment where we could make a choice to really engage our Latinx community more so. And yeah, I think just everything that other people have touched on, I agree with, and I think that that this is just a really exciting opportunity.
Ms. Barish.
I think my colleagues have covered it. I'm just looking through my notes to make sure there isn't
something else.
Yeah, I think it's covered. I will just repeat the customer service. It really struck me because, like, I think it's right. I think that we need to approach it that way. So, and everything else.
President Campen?
The downside of being on this side of the horseshoe, I'll just associate myself with everything that's been said. I thought that Dr. Carmona was a really, really outstanding candidate. I think this wasn't explicitly said, but I'll just add, everyone here, we've received letters, emails, calls from members of the immigrant community here in Somerville who were really, really enthusiastic, and I think that just speaks, that's one point that I don't know is explicitly made yet.
And I'm not sure if this point has been made yet, but I really saw in Dr. Carmona an inquisitiveness and also a humility that I thought that really came out in his interview for somebody who has such a long resume and has an MBA and a doctorate. I also felt that he really was in education for the right reasons, and that he saw the value in education, and it was for the students, and he was there to serve and do what he could do to help the students. And if what we needed in Somerville to help our students was him, he would be happy to do it. And if we needed what we needed in Somerville to help students was somebody else, he would be happy with that too. And I really felt that come through, and I appreciated that.
Unlike President Campen, I think it's a benefit of going last on to say a lot of stuff that I would have otherwise said. But I do want to particularly echo a couple of things, and I do have one or two things to add. I want to echo the customer service comment again. I agree that was simple and profound at the same time. I want to echo the hearing from immigrants in support of Dr. Carmona, and then I'm actually broaden that to say that Dr. Carmona was the only candidate for whom I heard from people who I had never heard of before, which means something to me. Like, the only candidate that I heard, we got endorsements for lots of candidates from people I had never heard of or talked to before, and for a district that I think still has a very real disconnect between some of the people who are very engaged and a lot of people who are not engaged, that matters. And the other thing I want to say, and you all forgive me, I realized yesterday that I've done 27 superintendent interviews. They've blurred in my head to some degree. So I can't be sure that this thing that stuck out for me for him wasn't from his first round interview. And if it is, I apologize for violating confidentiality. But of the 27 interviews I've sat through, his was the only one that I think correctly positioned schools in the middle of a larger ecosystem, and the need to address that we cannot get educational equity through schools alone. And I think while that is absolutely true, and in fact, like Ms. Patone said about Dr. Mendonsa, my experience with Dr. Carmona's references is that many, if not all of them, did a better job of selling him than he did, which may speak to the first time interviewing, what have you. For one of the things I heard from the references that I didn't get from Dr. Carmona, which may speak to we didn't ask the right questions, if you're a nurse, is that in his current role in Salem, he has been the lead on the HR work of diversifying the workforce. That has been central to his work in a way that I did not realize from his interviews. And that's, I think, of all of our goals, that's the stickiest widget. That matters to me. I guess I'm good for that on for now. So having heard all of the, sure, actually I was going to really finish my introduction, and I'll let you go first. Having heard all of the positives and concerns for the three candidates who got some votes in the first straw poll. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, yes, do you run more positive than with the concerns?
Thank you. So the other positive I wanted to mention is, I was hoping a colleague would mention this. In discussing special education, what he talked about is sort of what special education should look like is supports for students who can't access curriculum through general education. And I think there's a lot of perception about special education that it's sort of the hammer, and there's a legal aspect, and there's compliance, and that's not incorrect. But if we really want to make education inclusive for as many of our students as possible, it's about conceiving ways of, realizing what special education should look like. And again, I also have done 27 superintendent interviews, but my recollection is that, he spoke to special education is intended to supplement general education. And that is, again, speaks to that vision for what the future of education should look like in a way that I wanted to note positively. I'm going to pass on the negatives.
Okay. Mayor Valentine?
I just wanted to build on what you just said.
So
and-
before you do it, let's do the concerns, and then I'm going to say, I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to add on.
Then I'll hold.
Yeah. Mr. Tone.
Thank you, Chair Green. I guess it's kind of a two-sided thing. There's a concern with a positive for me. I mean, he's a real inquisitive learner, but I also want to acknowledge that he's been in his current role in central office for less than a year. He has deep experience as a principal. So there's different choices that people make, and deep experience as a principal really brings something to the table. And his focus has been primarily in elementary education. There's some middle school, no high school. So those are two areas where he would really have to emphasize and work on his experience to learn and his desire to learn and his humility. So I just wanted to flag those things that create some concerns for me.
Mr. Phillips.
Before I talk about this concern, I want to say that if I'm voting just for me, Dr. Carmona is the candidate I most want to work with. My concern is that I think our district is in a really fragile position, and if I try to apply hiring the superintendent to hiring a new executive director for my organization, I would be really concerned if the entire executive team and leadership team had strong support for a different candidate than the one we picked. I think that's not the best choice for our organization. I do not think that sets us up for success, and I'm very nervous about that.
Ms. Dion.
Pass.
Ms. Barish.
I think my only point of concern, or the one that really comes to mind, is just because of his short central office experience, his preparation for the politics of the job.
President Campbell.
I think that my concerns, they're not negative attributes of the candidate in any way. They're just echoes of what's been said. I think it's important to me that our central office and principals had a strong preference for a different candidate. I think that's really relevant. And I think the length of time that he's been in his current role, those are the concerns for me.
Okay. Description?
To build on that, just some of the concerns I've heard, they're not necessarily directly what are my concerns, but just from what I've heard, that he perhaps wasn't as engaging as some of our other candidates, which in a role that is often politics. I think that can matter. Also, that some of his references say that he is disorganized, which again is something potentially one can work with. I just wanted to point out that that was something some people heard in references. And also because of his short role in his current job and switching from a different job, that if he comes here and doesn't like it, that he might not stay. The limited experience with central office has been covered, and that, yeah, I think that covers it.
I think most of my concerns have been covered. I would just say that, like, to echo Ms. Patone in particular, while I have no question of his ceiling, the question of how much support would he need in that first year is my question. Knowing that, frankly, but that being said, I think all our candidates will probably need scaffolding that first year. It's a matter of what kind of scaffolding. All right, so now, having gone through that with all of our finalists, I will now open the floor for members who either want to comment on something they've heard, perhaps ask questions, add something to this conversation that has been added, and we'll go from there, and then we'll do another straw poll. Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would just like to address what I've heard from Dr. Phillips, and while I wasn't present at the principal session, I was present to listen to school administrators or the district staff, and I'm not sure that I would characterize like an unequivocal, strong, enthusiastic support for Mr. Romer over any of the other candidates. That there was a preference, but I wouldn't characterize it as like strong and unequivocal, and I certainly wouldn't characterize it as something where we would be, voting against the interest of our staff should we not install Mr. Romer.
I'd like to follow up on that. I think this is one of the few places where, although I agree with Mayor Ballantyne in general about the dangers of relying too heavily on this survey data, I think this is a place where we can use it to some degree. And what I found, having been in the principal meeting, and I think it's interesting, is that the survey data showed much less unanimity than they said publicly. I do believe it is fair to say that Mr. Romer is the first choice of central office and principals, and that's something I also take into consideration in my decision. But I don't know that the data suggests that first is only choice. Ms. Dion.
I also wanted to give, as a positive for Dr. Carmona, the way he spoke about, the way he responded to some criticisms when I had asked about his leadership style as a principal, and when he said, doing the equity work that I want to do, if someone's not on board with that, then that could feel like a micromanagement. And I thought that was a really insightful kind of answer to the question I had posed to him. I also liked what he said about just talking a lot about social emotional aspects, responsive classroom, and trauma-informed practices and restorative justice, which are all things that we've, are fans of here. And in terms of his experience, I know that some people see it as a lack of relevant experience. I just see it as different experience. Especially, like Chair Green pointed out, that his whole job in Salem right now is working with educators of color, which has been a very difficult one of our goals. So I just wanted to kind of say that in addition.
Ms. Barish?
Thank you. I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Dr. Ackman said, to say that that there were certainly many comments regarding the strengths of Dr. Carmona from district staff. And that I think that I guess the other things Dr. Ackman said, I agree with.
Maybe I cut you off earlier, so I want to make sure I got back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to build on what you said earlier about the data. I'm struggling a little bit with this. We have a fragile system. Because is that saying that I'm not really sure what that means, so I will, I struggle with that a lot because I don't feel we have a fragile system. I think we have a very strong system, and again, having been a parent in the Somerville Public Schools for 21 years, going through 3 superintendent search, and being 15 months in to my role as mayor, there might be change. But I've also, in my department, there's opportunity. I mean, in my tenure as mayor, I mean, we've given promotions and transferred, nearly 100 staff members because there's been opportunity for them. So I struggle with that, and I don't. I haven't seen that in the schools. I think we have a very professional, strong teaching body, leadership body, and within the Somerville Public Schools. And if someone decides to move on, to say it's because of, they didn't like the superintendent, that could be in fact the case. It could be, but there's wonderful things to stay here, and it's the education, it's the commitment certainly that the mayor's office, my office, has made to the public schools. So I still feel that Dr. Carmona would be a great candidate, and I think this is the thing that I talk about in my day-to-day work. It's, Chair Green, you said he understands the school within a larger ecosystem, and I agree. That's what I understood, that you understand yourself in what it means to be in Somerville, what it means to be in the greater Boston area, opportunities for collaboration, bringing Bunker Hill Community College here, just open to all of those things, and understanding that you got to zoom in, but you need to zoom out to determine how to move our district forward and continue the steps that we've been making. Thank you.
Dr. Phillips, are you responding to the mayor directly? Because if we saw, let's go next. No, go ahead, please.
We're still in a pandemic. We had a pandemic for 2 years, right? That decimated a lot of the progress that we made. We lost our superintendent, who was a very strong superintendent, who fortunately built a great bench that we have right before us, but most of whom are very new to their roles, still learning themselves. We talk a lot about how we support, we value our central office leadership, how we support and we value our principals. And while I totally hear you, there was a clear preference for Mr. Romer among the cabinet. There was support for Dr. Carmona. In the principals meeting, I pushed really hard to see if there was any dissension from consensus. Barely we got a little bit of it. And that makes me think, what are we saying to our staff and our leadership if we, as the political leaders of the city, don't listen really carefully to what they have to say? And maybe we have all listened and we have made our own minds, and that is fine. Maybe what I am hearing is not what you are hearing, but I think I am hearing what folks are saying, and it makes me worried as a body to choose a different course. It may be the right risk to take, 100%, right? I personally want to work for Dr. Carmona, but I'm not sure it's the right risk to take for the district.
Ms. Stone, then Dr. Ackman,
Thank you, Chair
and then Ms.
Green.
Barish.
I'd like to kind of switch a little bit and think more about people's assets. I really feel like we had an incredible pool. I apologize, I probably missed this whole conversation, but there are 4 people that could run this district for us. And we have the privilege to be able to choose someone. And, you know, when I step back, I really appreciated the time that everyone gave us to do references, and it really helped me sort of frame this decision for myself, because I do see, particularly for myself, 2 preferred candidates between Dr. Carmona and Mr. Romer. And when I kind of break down these skill sets and these experiences, I think about things like HR, being able to coach principals, being able to manage people in or manage people out if they're not a fit. I think about values and equity. I think about teaching and learning. I think about our constituents and how well they engage with our full constituents, all of our constituents who are very diverse. I think about financials, I think about operations, and I think about collective bargaining. And over this whole thing, I think about values and equity, right? So these are kind of all the spaces. And I tried to, in my own mind, logically think about how each player played in all of these spaces. And there are, you know, Mr. Carmona has really done, Dr. Carmona has done some really interesting things around HR for the last 9 months. Dr. Carmona clearly has a connection with a broad population of constituents of our families. That's something I've heard really consistently in the references. And in terms of managing people, coaching people in and out, those challenging things, and, you know, being an educational leader around instruction and curriculum, I got those strengths. I got all those strengths too, maybe not as much in the equity focus around HR, but for Mr. Romer, he's played in all these spaces. He's been involved in finance, he's been involved in operations, he's been involved in collective bargaining. Both of these candidates have the values, in my opinion, and both of them are bought in to an equity agenda. This is in particular hearing from colleagues and peers for Mr. Romer of color, who said he's an incredible ally and he's been part of this work from day one. He may not be a person that reflects all of our student population, but he is bilingual in Spanish. One of the teachers had said or commented on the fact that he went in those classrooms and went in and out of Spanish and English seamlessly with the students. And that teacher was really impressed. So I don't think either of them are a poor choice. I would be excited to work with either of them, but I have to be really clear that my preference is Mr. Toby Romer because of his experience and because he's touched all of these spaces in a deep way.
Dr. Ackman?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what the mayor said, that while not speaking as passionately, I, as Dr. Phillips may have, I disagree with the sense of fragility, and I don't think it's disrespectful to our staff to take them into account as one perspective in a macro perspective that we have to weigh. And I kind of take umbrage at that implication.
Ms. Barish, then Ms. Dion.
I was just thinking about the principals meeting. I wasn't there, but I have to assume that 2 of the principals who might have been at the meeting won't be principals next year, and 2 of the principals who will be here next year probably weren't at the meeting because they're new hires. So I'm just reflecting on that and wondering if it would have been a different vibe with the people who will be here when the new superintendent is here.
So don't believe any of the outgoing principals were there, but it's also true that none of the incoming principals were there. And it is, again, worth pointing out the data that while the room was unanimous, the data was not, which may speak to other dynamics we need to be considered, which I will say may speak to the mayor's point. A certain degree of disruption is a good thing, right? Like, if we were perfectly structured to do the work we need to do, we've already done it. So I certainly take my central office staff and I take my principals very seriously. The reality is, no matter who we select, some of them will probably depart, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, we think the world of them. We want to believe that everything will go on as it was, but it won't. And as much as I love Mary Skipper, that's also not always that's not necessarily a bad thing. The next stage in our growth will require different skills, different structures, and maybe different people than what got us here. So a certain degree of disruption is not a bad thing. Obviously, I think there's too much disruption. You can definitely have too much of a good thing. And if I believe that a candidate would cause too much disruption, I would not consider them. Ms. Dion.
I just want to say what Ms. Patone mentioned about switching seamlessly between English and Spanish, I'm sure Dr. Carmona would be able to do that as well. And also, so I hear what you're saying, Dr. Phillips, in terms of respecting our central office staff and our principals, and I agree with Dr. Ackman that, taking them into account as one set of stakeholders and also thinking about all the other sets of stakeholders is not necessarily disrespecting them. And I think I want to bring up groups of stakeholders, first of all teachers, and having spoken with union leadership in both Salem and Newton, that pushed me clearly towards Dr. Carmona because they just had more positive things to say. And then also thinking about another group of stakeholders, families that are not normally engaged, and thinking about how having a bilingual, bicultural Latino as superintendent, how far that would go in creating conditions for equity.
Ms. Hepson.
So while I agree that principals in central office are just one constituency that we need to consider, I do want to go back to Dr. Phillips' point about these are the folks that are going to work most directly with the superintendent day in and day out. I also, having been in that principals meeting and thinking about how hard the job of the principal is, in some ways it's even harder than the superintendent, which is a really hard job. And I just am thinking about what our principals need to feel supported and to feel like they're growing in their jobs. And so when I think about what they told me, what they saw in Mr. Romer, that is a big piece of information for me, although I am still really torn and really like Mr. Romer and Dr. Carmona. So I will just say that for the record now.
All right, if there are no further comments right now, I think I'll do another straw poll. This time, I think I will again ask for your top two so we can at least narrow it down, but I'll ask you to actually give them in ranked order. So your first choice and your second choice.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
We're gonna do another straw poll. This time, again, I'm asking you for two again, but this time rank them. Dr. Ackman?
Dr. Carmona and Mr. Romer.
Okay. Mayor Ballantyne?
Dr. Carmona and Mr. Romer.
Ms. Patone?
Mr. Romer and Dr. Carmona.
Dr. Phillips?
Mr. Romer, and Dr. Carmona.
Ms. Dion?
Dr. Carmona and Dr. Mendonsa.
Ms. Barish?
Dr. Carmona and Mr. Romer.
President Ewan-Campen?
Romer, Carmona.
Ms. Crepston?
Dr. Carmona, Mr. Romer.
And I am also Dr. Carmona, Mr. Romer. So with the results of the straw poll as currently exists, Dr. Carmona does have a majority of first choice votes. So unless in the absence of any further discussion, I will entertain a motion.
I move to appoint Dr. Ruben Carmona as Superintendent of Somerville Public Schools commencing July 1st, 2023, subject to reaching an agreement with them on a contract of employment mutually agreeable to the candidate and the school committee and signed by both parties or their designees and subject to an acceptable background check.
Second.
Sorry, I had my back turned. I didn't see you. Thank you. I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Dion. This obviously will be a roll call vote. Superintendent Curley, will you call the roll?
Yes, no, not the name, right?
Yes, this is a yes/no vote.
Dr. Ackman,
Yes.
Mayor Ballantyne,
Yes.
Ms. Patone,
No.
Dr. Phillips,
No.
Ms. Dion,
Yes.
Ms. Barish,
Yes.
President Ewan-Campen,
No.
Ms. Crepston,
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Motion carries.
By a vote of 6-3, the motion carries. As I mentioned, I will now ask for another vote to make it unanimous as a statement of support for our next superintendent.
Same motion.
Dr. Phillips.
I move that the Somerville School Committee put its full weight and support behind Dr. Ruben Carmona for Superintendent of Somerville Public Schools.
I have a motion by Dr. Phillips, seconded by Dr. Ackman. Any discussion? Hearing none. Superintendent Curley, will you call the roll?
Dr. Ackman,
Yes.
Mayor Ballantyne,
Yes.
Ms. Patone,
Yes.
Dr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Dion,
Yes.
Ms. Barish,
Yes.
President Ewan-Campen,
Yes.
Ms. Crepston,
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Now I'm going to ask that we take a 10-minute recess while we inform Dr. Carmona and see if we get a response. And if we do, we will have to schedule an executive session to discuss contract. So we are recessed for 10 minutes. us to enter negotiations.
So moved.
A motion by Dr. Ackman, second by Ms. Patone. I'll do this by, I don't think this needs a roll call. All in favor? Opposed? All right, we'll be in touch with them in the next couple of days to start negotiations and expect our executive session on your calendar shortly. I think, Superintendent Curley, do you have some words? And then if people want to say any last words, we'll do that and then we'll go home.
Thank you, Chair Green. I just want to give some thanks and just some really quick remarks, if I could. Thank you to the chair. Thank you to Vice Chair Krepshin and the entire committee. This has been obviously a long road, and in some ways I feel like I'm partially responsible for having not been in this search, that we've gone through the whole thing, but I want to say, the dedication time that you all put into this is evident in the quality of the candidates that we have before us as finalists tonight. I want to be the first among you to also congratulate Dr. Carmona. He's going to be joining a great team. Like, this is a great group of folks, obviously both here at the senior leadership level and at the school level. We're fortunate, as the mayor mentioned, that this is a district with incredibly strong educators, incredible paraprofessionals, incredible staff that are committed to our kids. It's why my kids are here at the West, and I'm just happy every day for the team that we have in place, working with them, and we're excited to lift up and work with Dr. Carmona on day one and support the transition and support him in every way possible. As was said at the top, we had 4 really strong finalists, and it's a credit to the process that we were in the position, the fortunate position that we were. Somerville is a district that people want to work in, and it's a place that we're fortunate to have great educators and great leaders who want to be a part of. In addition to the school committee, I just want to give some thanks to the staff who also invested a ton of time, to Catherine Santiago, to Jackie Peaks, Abby Luthen, Karen Woods, to Jess, to Chad, our principals, everybody. It's obviously an incredibly crazy busy time of year, and everybody pitched in because of how important this is, and I think I just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge, one of the things I think that makes Somerville such a strong city is the amount of engagement that we get from our community, from our parents, from stakeholders. This was a process that I think really lifted up that strength in our city, and I think it's one of the great assets that Dr. Carmona is going to arrive to, and obviously one of his incredible strengths as a leader. So I just want to thank everybody that participated in this process. And last, I just want to say, again, we're ready, we're eager to support. We will be planning the transition from tonight forward, getting ready for Dr. Carmona and making sure that this is as smooth and seamless as a process, and welcoming him to this great team. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Chair, through you, and I apologize for my voice. It sounds worse than I feel. But I just wanted to echo Superintendent Curley's remarks in that we as a team, we will miss Dr. Curley, obviously, but we are really thrilled to bring on Dr. Carmona. Personally, I know him. I've known him for almost 5 years, and I think he's a wonderful individual, which came out in the comments, but also I think we as a team are excited to work with closely and support him in his transition. So I will just kind of echoing what Dr. Curley said and just congratulating Dr. Carmona, but also the other finalists. As I agree, I think we all came in today thinking, we have a great pool, as many of the members mentioned. We have a great pool in that we're going to be in good hands. And so I appreciate kind of the process and listening for everyone that reached out to listen to us and listen to our educators and listen to our families. And just really, we're excited. We're ready to support and ready to work together to make sure that the transition is as strong as it can be.
Please.
Through you, Chair. Yes, echo and echo. Superintendent Curley, Dr. Boston Davis. I think, we have a strong team that is ready and willing to welcome Dr. Carmona and support him, however he needs to be supported. I think that's one of the strengths of this district is the amount of support that we give everyone, from families to staff, and now our, incoming superintendent. And, I'm looking forward to working with him as well. So we will anxiously await him to start with us, but we will begin our planning probably tomorrow.
I'm just going to go, I'm actually going to have you start this question to give Dr. Ackman a break this time so people can see what I need to say.
I just wanted to add to that wonderful list of thanks the students who came and had lunch with various candidates. I found that to be a really interesting experience, both to chat with the students, because it's not something we on school committee tend to have an opportunity to do, and also just to see the candidates interacting with students, because obviously students are why we have schools. So I just wanted to add that thanks.
I'm going to go around. You don't have to say anything, but...
I just had a wave of terror thinking we were supposed to have prepared speeches about Attendant Curley, so
That's
I
June.
did not do that.
That will happen in June.
No, in all honesty, I just want to thank all of my new colleagues on the school committee. This has been incredibly inspiring and impressive, and obviously everyone who was involved in this search. I've learned a lot, and I'm very excited by the outcome.
Ms. Barish?
Thank you. Gratitude all around to the central office, to the screening committee, both screening committees, to my colleagues for the really thoughtful conversation, everyone at home who's been following along and providing their feedback, and to the candidates who, stepped up and gave it a shot and really brought their best, I think, in both rounds. Thank you.
I'm really excited to get to work with Dr. Carmona, and thank you to, I think everybody brought their own unique perspective to this, and I felt like that was really valuable. And thanks to all the caregivers and staff who filled out the survey. I know it was, a busy week full of holidays, and so it was great that a lot of people got to fill out the survey. I'm especially grateful to, like Chair Green said, just anyone that we heard from that is someone that we have never heard from before. I'm really grateful to that, to people who felt passionate enough to reach out about a candidate, even if it was someone who had never communicated with us before. So it's really exciting.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips?
I want to thank our search committees. I want to thank Dr. Ackman and Mr. Green for chairing both
Never
of them.
PhD, never.
You did a great job. I want to thank Ms. Patone, Ms. Krupchen, Ms. Barish, Ms. Dion, everyone who coordinated something, made a reference call, helped us figure out which end is up. We made a better decision because of your work. I want to thank the central office team for their strategic thought partnership, for helping us make really good choices, and just leading to really great search processes. Thank you. Thank all the caregivers who told us what they thought. I want to thank my husband for the endless childcare he has been doing. And I want to thank all of you for being great colleagues, and Dr. Carmona, who I'm very excited to work with.
So when I was a kid, my dad used to tell me that hard choices are when you have a choice. And it's very clear what the answer is. It is not a hard choice, it's an easy choice. And we had a hard choice here, and we had 4 incredibly talented educational leaders that this whole group and lots of other people were involved bringing forward for us, including our friends at MASC who are not here any longer. But And it was a real privilege and a luxury to be part of a hard choice. I was excited about all the candidates. I was particularly excited about 2 candidates, and I'm glad one of those candidates is going to be our leader. And I want to thank the finalists. It is a brutal, brutal process. They have to do a private process, they have to do a public process, and I want to make it really clear, I guess for myself, is that there's no losers here. These are 3 other talented educational leaders that will continue to do excellent work in the Commonwealth or elsewhere, and I look forward to seeing how their careers move forward. And so thanks to everyone. I don't want to list everybody again, but it was such a participatory, compelling, and thought-provoking process. So thank you to all my colleagues, central office, educators, parents, caregivers, all the good people that were part of this. And I'm really proud of what has transpired here. So, and I look forward to working with Dr. Carmona.
Mayor Valentine?
Thank you. So I'll echo everything that everybody said, but I do, also want to say thank you to the search committee, to the central staff, Dr. Curley, for this, stepping in and really leading the city here as our interim superintendent, thanking the candidates, parents, caregivers, and Chair Green for, getting us through this evening.
Landing the plane, as we've
Wonderful.
been saying for like 2 months now.
Thank you.
Dr. Ackman?
Thank you. I've learned a lot, and Ms. Patone and I had a conversation, what's today, Monday? I think it was Thursday, I don't remember, at some point where I mentioned I hope to never use this skill set again. I would like to name appreciation for Ms. Peaks, our communications director, who, especially during the first round, took my and made it into just outstanding prose that people could comprehend, and, pulled schedules. It was really deeply appreciated. And Catherine Santiago, who I know has been named, but also again in the first round, when she was like, hey, open meeting law, hey, you got to get this posted, and many other things. Thank you. To what the chair said about, to a colleague said about MASC, Glenn Kuchar, I'll serve as a reference for that guy for a superintendent search just any day. Karen Woods, who really stepped up and was just immensely flexible to what the school committee was asking her for, and stepped up and stepped back as we needed. I echo my appreciation for the candidates, especially the finalists, because going through this, but I would also like to name Jill Geiser, who I truly hope is immensely successful in Belmont. Because we would have been excited to bring her, to have her as a finalist as well. And to the chair and vice chair, you did a lot. I don't know how else to say it. And to central office, who, again, I only ran the search the first time, but watched how they pulled together schedules and made space while still running a district. This time, Mr. Mazur mentioned, while still running MCAS. Seriously, it's awe-inspiring, and thank you.
Chair's privilege, last word is mine. So I woke up this morning thinking about the last really controversial vote we had around Powderhouse schools, and how these votes always seem harder before you take them. But then, as now, how lucky I am when I look around the state and look at other school committees to be part of a school committee that, while we're far from perfect, and have our own equity journeys to go on, takes our job, take our oath, take the work very seriously. and I think that showed tonight. My mother actually said something very similar to Ms. Patone's father, although what she told me was, if the choice were easy, someone would have already made it. And I was rule for anything. If it was easy, someone already did it. And so tonight we had a really hard decision to make. But it's a position I think we get to make from a position of strength because we have such an amazing team here in Somerville. And so I want to also give some thanks there. I want to thank Dr. Curley. Certainly, if I landed the plane or whatever I may have done, Dr. Curley has had listened to me vent probably more than any superintendent should have to about finding their replacement. I want to thank, obviously, Ms. Santiago. If you've never served on school committee, it is impossible, I think, for you to understand just how much work and how important work Ms. Santiago does. I recognize, this came up during the process, that one of my weaknesses is organization. And so I would say to any leader who struggles with their own organization, find you a Catherine Santiago and hold on to her, because that's how the work actually gets done. I want to echo the thoughts. I want to echo the thanks to Ms. Peaks, who her title may be Director of Communications interim, but I think anyone who's part of the search committee knows how much of a project manager she was in this process, how much of a voice for sanity and reason, staff bandwidth she was. And so none of that stuff is in the job description, but we would have been a worse district if she not been in this role this year, so thank you. I want to also thank Ms. Woods, who, again, I think made this an actual job search in a way that superintendent hunts often aren't because of the political nature of the job. And so the level of professionalism she brought to the role, I think, is a good part of the reason tonight we were faced with a hard choice. And so I want to make sure she knows she has our gratitude. And I want to thank our assistant superintendents. We were in a position to be able to make hard choices and really think about the long-term thinking of the district, because we know that the day-to-day running of the district is in such excellent hands with Dr. Davis and Mr. Mazza. I just want to make sure that it is known that we are able to do this work because of the work you two have done this year and the support we know you will give our next leader. And finally, I want to thank Dr. Ackerman, Ms. Krupchen, and Ms. Patone for their work on the search committee. Oftentimes, leaders get all the credit because we get to be the face, but it is like the day in, day out work they did, organizing things and making sure meetings were posted and making sure we had reached out to all the right references and all of the 10,000 little things that they managed to get done that no one will ever know was a joy to watch and joy to be beneficiary of. So thank you all. And last, I want to thank Somerville. As the superintendent said, this is a district a community that cares. That care is evident in this process. And while for us this process may be over, for the city and the district it's only just beginning. So I offer and I encourage the school committee to be in deep support of the staff, of the community, of the whatever choice we made tonight. There would have been people who were disappointed. In the days to come, I urge us to listen to those disappointed voices. I urge us to take their concerns seriously, make sure that Dr. Carmona is positioned to address them forthrightly and correctly, and we can all come together as a city on behalf of our young people. Thank you. And with no further business for this body, we are adjourned.